For the fifth grade NGSS standards, I am doing standard 5-PS1-3. The topic of this standard is matter and its interactions, and the description is make observations and measurements to identify materials based on their properties. Some background knowledge going in with this standard that you would like to convey to the students is that scientists use and make observations all the time to compare and contrast different items. They also use observations to determine what an item is. Some of the most common properties that scientists look at include color, hardness, reflectivity, electrical conductivity, thermal conductivity, response to magnetic forces, and solubility. An activity to go with this standard. To start, the teacher will explain how scientists use physical properties to classify items based on similarities. Um, Before they get going, the teacher will give examples of physical properties about certain objects and show how they can be compared and contrasted. When the students have this background information, a practice activity/experiment will be done with materials found in the classroom. The students would be divided into groups, and each group will have a box filled with multiple items that would be found around the classroom. And the job of each group will be to divide all the items in the bag into groups based on their physical properties. Groups will be taking out every item and looking at the physical properties and dividing them into groups based on what they see and some of those properties that I mentioned in the previous slide. As they're dividing these into groups, students can divide them into as many groups as possible, but there has to be at least two groups. And if an item is in a group of its own, it is known as an outlier from the rest of the group. This would be an item that doesn't have any of the same physical properties as any of the other items in the bag. Um, that was just a beginning activity, a practice where students begin to start looking at physical properties on items and classifying them based on those physical properties. So after the students have practiced making those observations that they see on a daily basis, they begin to do the same process but with items that are more related to science. For this part of the activity, there will be stations set up across the classroom with three or more items that have similarities but are all very different. At each station, students will be required to determine the objects based on their properties. So this part of the activity goes back to the description in the actual standard and has to do with determining what an item is based on its physical properties. So as the stations are across the room, students will be broken up into groups again, and they will be recording what they find at each station. An example station, the first one would be a station that has 3 glasses of liquid at the table. One will have bleach, one will have water, and one will have soda. And students in their groups will have to record in their notebooks and explain how they can determine which liquid is which. Some of the things the teacher would be looking for is that the students can tell that the soda is soda because of the carbonation and the color. The color of the soda would be, let's say we're using Coke, would be darker than the water and the bleach, so that's the physical property that lets them know that that's the soda, would be the color. And then they would be able to tell the difference between the bleach and the water based on smell, and the water is different than the soda because it's clear. So these are some physical properties that they would need to look at in order to determine which liquid is which. Another station would have three different types of rocks: the igneous, the sedimentary, and the metamorphic rock. And students would be required to do the same thing where they use their notebooks and write the physical characteristics of each rock that helps them determine which is which. So when they look at the three rocks, they'll record the physical properties that let them tell the difference between the three of them. A third station will have three jars, one with salt, one with sugar, and one with baking soda. The students will have a chance to pour vinegar all over three jars to determine which item reacts with the acid. Um, in this case, students will take what they have learned and determine that the third jar is the baking soda because it would be the one that reacts with the vinegar. So students will be able to use the vinegar to help them determine what is in the three jars, as well as the physical properties of the three items in those jars. But the vinegar will help them separate the baking soda from the others. So that's just an experiment that will show the acid and the base reacting with the baking soda and the vinegar. Some obviously with those three activities, some of them require knowledge that the students will need to know before. So this is something that could be you would go over before the activity, or maybe you already studied it in a different lesson. But for example, the three different types of rocks, students would have to have the previous knowledge of the difference between those rocks in order to look at those physical properties and determine which is which. And they would also need to know that how vinegar reacts with a different base to determine that the baking soda is separate from the salt and the sugar. So using these activities, the students would have to have these prior knowledges in order to be effective when using these activities and trying to take the physical properties and determine which is which. These three activities, I think, are a great way to help the students practice using observations of physical properties to tell the difference between one item compared to two others in this example. So I think this would be a great way to look at that standard and give the students some good practice with it.